Welcome to Spiritual Cartel's Step Meeting. Tonight we're looking at Step 3. This week I'm pleased to introduce Dorinda, who has kindly agreed to come and share for us. Dorinda, over to you.
Hi James, I'm Dorinda, I'm an alcoholic. Thanks so much for the intro, thank you for your service, and Angela and everybody, Dave, all you guys there in the background. I absolutely love this meeting. And I was kind of reflecting today on the way we open up every meeting by saying, like, I'm Dorinda, I'm an alcoholic, or I'm James, I'm an addict. And we say it at every single meeting, you know, and sometimes I go to 2 meetings a day and I'm not really connecting to what I'm saying. I'm just kind of reaming it off like, I'm Dorinda, I'm an alcoholic. But it's such an important thing that I'm actually stating. And I was thinking today, why do we actually do it? Like, why do we say at every single meeting that we're an alcoholic? Like, why do we proclaim our illness every single day? And, you know, I think it's so that everybody in the room knows that we're all on an equal platform. You know, it gives us kind of a sense of humility, like, I'm an alcoholic and maybe you are too. And for a long time, I actually didn't know what the word alcoholic meant. You know, I grew up in an alcoholic home, so both of my parents are alcoholic and they both died from alcoholism. So I just thought if you were an alcoholic, you know, you drank yourself to death. That's the only experience I had of it. I'd never heard anybody say, I'm a recovered alcoholic. I really didn't think that was a possibility. You know, I knew there were people in the world that didn't drink, but my interpretation of that was that they must be miserable, they must be really suffering all the time, they must be like sitting on their hands every day trying so hard not to run to the off license. Because I know the one time I tried to do dry January, I only lasted till about the 6th and was losing my mind and ran to the off license. So I was like, Jesus, you know, I used to work with a woman who told me, we became really close, and she told me she was an alcoholic but she didn't drink. And she didn't seem miserable at all, actually. But I just felt sorry for her. Just thought, my God, like, that's just awful. I'm there with my pint in my hand. I actually ended up getting fired from that job. I was also reflecting on that today. You know, tonight's share is around step 3. But in order to get to step 3, you obviously have 2 preceding steps. We have steps 1 and 2. And in the big book, it tells us on page 60, our description of the alcoholic, which is, you know, step 1. We've got the doctor's opinion, gives us a description of the alcoholic, Bill's story. Bill is obviously an alcoholic and he takes us through his experience. We've more about alcoholism. So we've read these chapters and we've got to hear the chapter to the agnostic and our personal adventures before and after. So our own personal experiences with alcoholism make clear 3 pertinent ideas. So by the time I get to page 60, I should be convinced of these things. A, that I'm an alcoholic and I can't manage my own life. B, that probably no human power could relieve me of my alcoholism. And C, that God could and would if he were sought. And it says being convinced, we're at step 3. And I know when I read this for the first time, I don't know that I was convinced that, you know, that God could or would if he were sought, because I didn't really have a strong relationship with God at this stage. You know, it's quite early into the process, but I did know from reading the preceding chapters that, yeah, I am what they're describing. You know, when I start drinking, I can't stop. I never knew why that was, though. I didn't realize that it's because of this physical allergy thing. I thought when I start drinking and I can't stop, it's because I'm just really greedy. I have a really high tolerance for alcohol. I'm just, you know, I'm hardcore. You know, like other people are just lightweights. Maybe it's because I'm Irish. It's in my blood. I just love it. And that is actually partially true. You know, the doctor's opinion says men and women drink essentially because they like the effect produced by alcohol. 100%. You know, I absolutely love the effect produced by alcohol. I love that more than I love life itself. You know, I'm willing to die for the effect produced by alcohol, which I've also come to learn. The way alcohol affects alcoholics is not the way it affects normal people. You know, I've asked my my sister Tara, my older sister, she's not an alcoholic. She's one of those weird people who can have like 2 glasses of wine and then switch to water and like start reading her book, and you're just looking at, I start squirming like, fucking drink another glass. Like, it makes me so uncomfortable. I remember going on a holiday with her once in Portugal, and we were sitting on the beach, and one of these guys went by with, you know, the beer things, and it's a roasting hot day, and she's contemplating. She's like, will I get one? And I was thinking, you know, if that was me, I'd be like, here, like calling your man over, I'd want 10 of them. Any plans we would have had for the rest of the day would have been gone out the window. There'd be no swimming, nothing. But Tara has like one, you know, starts reading her book, goes in for a swim, doesn't have another one, and is still like, wants to go on a bus tour later on. I'm like, are you insane? Like, that has never made sense to me. Ever since I started drinking, I have one, and I'm like, oh my God, I'm in heaven. This is all I want to do. I love it. I love the effect produced by alcohol. That my life had become unmanageable, that was pretty clear to me as well, because without going into some big drunkalogue, by the end of my drinking, I was alone in my apartment. My partner had left because I was drinking while I was pregnant, not able to pay the rent, no job. Leading up to my pregnancy, me and this guy had gotten together, and I'd managed to, maybe for the first couple of weeks of our relationship, kind of play down my alcoholism. You know, we'd go on a night out for dinner or something, and I'd blame it on, like, he'd be like, you got really hammered last night. I'm like, oh, I'm just nervous because I like you so much, and oh, you have that effect on me. And, you know, I would act as if like, oh, I just read about this new red wine. It's like a Malbec, and apparently it's like really supposed to be really nice, and yeah, we ended up moving in together, and I insisted that we had a wine rack, you know, for all these visitors and all these guests that would be coming over, so we could offer them something. I had no friends left at this stage. Like, who are these guests that are coming over? You know, no one ever came over. And he actually told me that on our second date, I said to him, really, really drunk, halfway through the night, don't get too attached, by the way. I'll be dead by the time I'm 40. You know, like, really romantic. I've no idea why he wanted to see me again after that, but that's the way I used to carry on. He had to carry me home a lot of the time, or I'd go home, I'd lose my keys and start banging on the door, and then be like, fuck it, I'll just sleep in the garden, and he'd find me there the next day. And, you know, so my life was chaos. So when I told him I was pregnant, he was kind of looking at me like, this is a really bad idea. And he basically said, you know, you're an alcoholic and you can't take care of yourself, let alone a child. So if you decide to go through with this pregnancy, I'm not going to have any part of it, and I'm going to leave. So I proceeded to go mental, trash the apartment, and scream at him to get the hell out, which he did gladly. So yeah, at the end of my drinking, I'm alone in this apartment, no job. The last job I had, I'd been fired for drinking on a work night out. I had this kind of delusion with my drinking as well, that I knew I couldn't control it when I was at home on my own, but I thought that's because nobody was watching and I was just kind of drinking how I wanted to drink. But that in front of company, you know, like at a work Christmas party, that I would be able to control it. I didn't realize that's not the case. You know, if you've lost the power of choice over alcohol, you don't get to compartmentalize and behave when you're with certain people. It doesn't work like that. I wish it did. If you've got that mental obsession and that allergy, you start drinking, you're not going to stop until you're blackout, you know. And the big book describes this kind of Jekyll and Hyde personality that we have when we drink. You can be the nicest person in the world, but start drinking and you turn into an absolute nightmare. It speaks as well about, you know, the alcoholic is seldom mildly intoxicated. They're always more or less insanely drunk. Like, I used to wonder, why is that? Why can't I just stay at that lovely 3 drinks deep kind of level when I'm nice and I'm just more merry and I'm kind of flirting with the bartender, but I'm behaving myself. It's all good. Why do I always have to then start slamming shots and kicking over tables? What is that, you know? So I would try switching drinks, not drinking red wine, only drinking white wine, only drinking red and white wine, blah, 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 and none of it worked. And it's because that physical allergy inside me doesn't care what I'm drinking. You know, the alcohol touches my system. It can be beer, vodka, whiskey, it doesn't matter. That gets activated, the phenomenon of craving kicks off, and I literally cannot stop. And because I can't stop, I have way too much. I go way over the line and I cause havoc. And this last job, you know, I went out on my lunch break, or I went out on a Christmas party, and got completely hammered, convinced that because I was around work people who I respected, that I'd be able to behave myself. But I ended up calling the boss, like, you can imagine what I called him. And I told every single person at the table what I thought of them. And as for you, and you, I've never fucking liked you. Ugh. I went through everybody. I then fell down the stairs. They called an ambulance. When the ambulance came, I tripped over and banged my head off the bonnet. Refused to get in, was fighting with the ambulance driver. This is the kind of carry on, you know, and I didn't want my partner at the time to know I'd been fired. So I used to get up every day, pretend to go to work, but really I'd go and sit in this park near our house drinking cans. And the worst part was I'd have to go home after quote unquote work when he'd also be coming home from work and try to act sober. And it was torture. You know, and I remember, you know, during the day when I'm pretending to be at work, I'd be like, don't text him, don't message him, you need to be normal. But I'd be drinking, you know, 4 cans in, listening to YouTube in this park, in a complete delusion. And I'd be sending him like tracks by whatever, Daft Punk. Oh, listen to this, it's deadly. He's in work being like, it's a Wednesday at 2:30. Why is she sending me loads of tracks? You know, people, only drunk people do that. And I would think he doesn't know that this is just normal. And again, the doctor's opinion, he says, you know, our alcoholic life becomes the only normal one. And so, you know, that's just an essence of how my life had become. So when I got to this part of the book, I could see, yeah, I am what they describe in this book. The part about God could and would if he were sought, I think for me, I had this experience when I was like 20 years of age. So I'm not religious. I'm still not religious. I never have been. But when I was 20 years of age, I came home one day and I found my mom in her room. She had died from alcoholism. So she was an alcoholic. And for the last few years of her drinking, she used to just lie in bed drinking. She barely left the house. She barely ate. She went from like being a really big kind of woman to she faded away, basically. I used to get phone calls from the local pub being like, your mom is naked in the car park. She used to be found slumped in phone boxes. I mean, it was really horrendous. But by the end of her drinking, she was just in her room the whole time, and her room smelled really, really bad. At one point, me and my sister were so worried about her, we decided to get locks on the windows to stop her from going out and getting alcohol. When I look back on that, I just think the poor woman, what she must have went through, you know, when she'd have started drinking and we'd end up locking her into the room and locking the windows. She used to scrape at the door trying to get out. And I was only 20 then, and my alcoholism hadn't progressed to where it did at the end, but my alcoholism was headed in the exact same direction as hers, you know, and now I can really relate to that. If somebody had locked me in a room when I was 3 drinks in, I would have kicked the fucking door down. I would have done anything. I would have buried a hole, you know, like prison style. I would have gotten out because, my God, when that allergy is on you and that obsession is on you, you need to satisfy it. But anyway, I came home one day, I went into her room and she was slumped across her bed and there was blood on the floor and all over her face and she was dead. My reaction to that was actually to ring an ambulance and then to go straight to the pub and to start drinking. Again, in retrospect, not normal, but to me, that was normal because alcohol was my solution to every situation that made me even mildly uncomfortable, let alone something tragic, you know. But anyway, so the point of that story, my mom's room always smelled of like stale booze. It was just horrible. And it was a very distinct kind of smell in her room. But after she died, it was a few days later, you know, we'd had the funeral and I hadn't gone back into her bedroom because I couldn't face it. And I was sitting at the kitchen table. My sister came down to me and was like, Dorinda, you need to come upstairs into Mom's room. And I was like, no, I don't want to. And she said, please, I need you to come upstairs. So the two of us went upstairs. She opened up the door and I walked in and, you know, the way in a church when somebody dies and they shake incense over the coffin. It's that really kind of heavy, incensey kind of a smell, like almost misty. The whole room smelled of that, to the point that me and my sister were nearly coughing. It was this very pungent, undeniable smell. And we both just kind of looked at each other like, oh my God. And then we came out and we kind of closed the door and went back downstairs, and we were looking at each other like, are we imagining that? But I knew that we weren't, you know, and we went back up a few minutes later and it was gone. And the room was back to that stale alcohol smell, and it was that way since. But that experience when I was 20, I didn't realize the significance of it at the time. But in that moment, I knew that there was something very loving and cleansing happening in that room. And it just gave me a real sense of peace around my mom's death, that whatever that was, it was like it had cleansed her spirit and taken her somewhere. So I always knew from that moment, there's something more to this world, you know? So, but all I did since my mom died was just drink. And then my dad ended up dying a couple of years later. He was found in a laneway, a really tragic fall after being in the pub. And it's, you know, in Bill's story, he talks about these ominous warnings that we failed to heed. These were warning signs to me that alcoholism is really, really dangerous, you know, and it can kill you. But I just wasn't in a position to see the truth, I guess, at that time, you know. But back to step 3. So being convinced we're at step 3, which is that we decided to turn our will and our life over to the care of God as we understood him. Just what do we mean by that, and just what do we do? And it says the first requirement is that we be convinced that any life run on self-will can hardly be a success. On that basis, we are almost always in collision with something or somebody, even though our motives are good. And it goes on to say, you know, each person is like the director, that we're all just trying to run the show ourselves, and we all kind of want to be the center of attention. And I could really relate to this when I read it for the first time. You know, if people would just be nicer to me, you know, maybe I wouldn't drink as much. Or if the world, I used to think as well, if the world would just accept that people like drinking and just like make working hours shorter to allow us like a bit more of a lie-in to sleep it off, that might actually help, you know, this kind of thing. If the world would just bend to my kind of way of thinking, I honestly think everyone would be happier, especially me. And I was always in collision. I was in collision with absolutely everybody. I was such a lonely, frightened, just very empty shell of a person. Like, you know, alcoholism had kind of killed any dream or passion that I had had. You know, I have a good singing voice, but I would join a choir. I do the audition, I'd get in, but then they'd be like, okay, you need to be here every Thursday. I'm like, every Thursday? And I just never go back, you know, or I'd go and do a job interview for some job that I really wanted in like journalism or media or something. I'd do a really good interview. But then when the Monday morning, my start day would come around, I just wouldn't show up because I'd have gone out on the Sunday night. And so anything I tried to do, it always just disintegrated. And I could never understand why. I just thought I was really irresponsible. And, you know, I couldn't even blame my parents. They weren't even here anymore, you know. So, yeah, it's coming into AA, you know, I ended up having that little baby, despite my partner saying he'd leave. He did leave, but I went through with the pregnancy. And when my son was only a couple of weeks old, I wound up in hospital going through really, really bad withdrawal. And I nearly died. And I woke up one morning and I didn't even know where my little baby was. Thankfully, he was in his little bassinet in the sitting room. But I woke up one morning after an absolute bender. I didn't know when I had last fed him. He's like 5 weeks old. He could practically fit in the palm of my hand. He's an innocent little baby. And I just couldn't take care of him, you know. And I wound up in hospital and they said to me, you need to go to an AA meeting. And it happened to be, I feel like it was God guided me to a meeting where they were actually reading the doctor's opinion. And the girl that was doing the chair, she was just talking about this allergy and how when she starts, she can't stop, and how she has this spiritual malady that she feels restless and irritable when she's not drinking. And everything they were saying, every single person who spoke that night, it was like they were speaking directly to me. And it all just made sense. It was the first time anybody had ever explained my behavior that made sense. You know, it says that as well in the doctor's opinion. The phenomenon of craving explains why we do things that you can't otherwise account for. It's the reason I missed flights, lost jobs, you know, messed up relationships, because once you start, you can't stop. And then, you know, this mental obsession, once I'm stopped, I can't not pick up again. I have to pick up again. It's all I can think about. And we have these strange blank spots as well that, you know, I can't bring into my mind how bad the last time was. You know, I'd get fired, and on the way home from being fired, I'd be like, no, I didn't even like that job. And I'd go straight to the off license, and I'd believe that I didn't really like that job. Or, you know, there's a part of Bill's story I love actually where he says, I think he's just lost loads of money on the stock market and people are committing suicide and stuff. And he said he goes back to the bar, and once he starts drinking, this fierce determination to win returns. And I could really relate to that, because horrific things would happen to me and I'd be absolutely devastated, caused by drinking. But then I'd go to the pub, and as my Guinness is settling, which takes about 6 minutes if you do it right, I'd be sitting there and I'd already be thinking, oh, do you know what? It wasn't that bad. It's actually grand. I'll actually get a better, I'll end up running a company someday. And this fierce determination. And if you looked at my history, it's like, where is that confidence coming from? And it would grow and grow as I drank. And then I'd wake up the next morning and it is gone. And all I'm left with is the hideous horseman. I don't even know what I did last night. I'm scared to look at my phone. I'm sure we all know what that feels like. And it's just round and round and round, and it's horrendous. But back to the step 3 thing. I remember, so my really poignant, most powerful experience with step 3. I didn't quite know what I was doing the first time I did it. I was told, look, it's just a decision that there may be, do you think there's something out there greater than you? And I was like, yeah, I had this experience when my mom died. I know there is. Do you think it helped her? It's like, yeah, I do actually. It seemed loving. Do you think it would help you? Like, maybe even my mom is looking down at me. Maybe she can help me. I can't help myself. I knew that much. It's like, well, all you have to do is make a decision that you're going to just say a prayer to whatever that might be. Please help me. That's all you have to do for now. It's like, okay, I know I can do that. So when I first did step 3, that's all I really did. I just made this decision. But I was told, you know, if you're hungry and you decide to order a takeaway, it won't just appear. You have to actually then, you know, phone up, and it needs to be followed up by action. So you need to go through the rest of the steps, which I did. You know, I did my inventories, I made my amends. I got to step 12. I had started sponsoring other women, but I still, despite being sober, wasn't all that convinced that there was this loving God looking after me. I knew I wasn't keeping myself sober, but I hadn't had any major kind of God signs or whatever you want to call it until I was about a year sober, and I lived in this apartment with my little baby, just the two of us. He's like one and a half at the time. And my landlord gave us an eviction notice and said, you need to be out in like 6 weeks. And in Dublin at the time, there was a housing crisis. So I wasn't working. I'm relatively newly sober. There's a housing crisis. No landlord was going to give an apartment to a mother of a child who's unemployed. I mean, it wasn't going to happen. My parents had both died, and we've sold the family home. My sisters live in Australia. So I literally had nowhere to go. So I'm like, you know, I thought coming into recovery, my life was supposed to get better, and suddenly I have nowhere to go. I literally don't know what to do. And I was going onto all these housing websites, and there was nobody who was even calling me back, and it was really, really bleak. But there happened to be this guy who lived on my floor. His name is Jay. And I used to run into him in the lift the odd time. And as it turns out, I went down to the local meeting one day and he was there. And I walked in and he was like, you're one of us. So it turns out he's an alcoholic. He's an addict as well. He's like 20 years sober. So he's an old timer. And I told him the situation that was going on. And he had this real air of calmness about him. And he said to me, have you taken step 3? And I said, yeah. And then he was like, right, don't need to worry about it then. You're grand. It's like, grand. I'm going to be homeless and I have a child and I'm all alone. How the hell am I going to be grand? And he said, you made a decision in step 3 that God would be your father, that he'll look after you. So long as you keep showing up, chop wood, carry water, keep going to meetings, keep sponsoring women, keep carrying the message, you'll be grand. If you don't do those things, you won't be grand. But I know you're sponsoring X, Y, and Z. You're coming to the meeting with me today. You'll be grand. I said, but I was like, you don't need to worry about anything. And he said to me, for all you know, God is building you a house right now. And I just thought he was insensitive, crazy, and was like, whatever. But I had nothing else to do, so I would keep going to the meetings. But then, time was ticking, time was moving along. I had about a week to get out of the house. I had officially registered as homeless at this stage, and I was going to go into like a family hub thing. And I was really, really devastated. And I met Jay in the lift one day, and he's like, you took step 3, you're grand. Just chop wood, carry water. I was like, you say that to me one more time, I swear to God. You took step 3, you're grand. God's looking after you. Just get your arse down to the meeting, you'll be grand. Keep looking after newcomers, carry the message. Oh my God, I need practical advice here, not step work, Jesus. So I go down to the meeting one day, we're in the cafe afterwards, and I'm, moaning about my situation, don't know what I'm going to do, and this girl says, oh, I'm actually moving out of my house. It's like around the corner, I'll give you my landlord's number. I'm moving out on Friday. My eviction day was Friday, and Jay looked at me and went, see? You see me? So I end up moving into this apartment. It all ended up happening. She lived right around the corner. I also got a call then from the local creche saying that this barely even made any sense, that I'd been sponsored somehow in the community, that I would get free childcare and that Jack, my little toddler, could go there. I got a phone call from a recruitment agency saying the interview's on Monday, by the way, for that marketing role. And I honestly was like, what marketing role? I hadn't even applied for this role. So this woman was like, well, I don't know. I thought you had. Look, just go to the interview. Every single thing started falling into place. Everything. It was like God had a magic wand and was sprinkling fairy dust on me. It was just magical. And Jay just kept saying to me, see, I told you, he always shows up. He's looking after you. Don't need to worry. And he also said, I'm telling you, he could be building you a house for all you know. It's like, why do you keep saying that? So I'm living in this new place, but it's still just temporary. I still have a landlord. It's not all that secure. And one day I get a letter in the door. And basically I am sitting now in this absolutely beautiful 2-bed apartment that is permanent, that is mine, that I was given, and it was in an area in Dublin where they were in the process of building it, and they said when it's finished being built in October, it was October of last year, you'll get the keys and you can move in. And it was mind-blowing that Jay had said God could be building you a home, and it literally was. It was the most, I think people in these rooms have all experienced, if you've been through the steps and the awakening, we all have these things that happen when we leave our life in God's hands, and to anyone outside the rooms, it almost seems like you're making it up, but this really did happen. And it was that whole step 3, God wants me to stay sober, to carry this message, to help his kids. That's what he wants me to do. And that's what I did, even throughout that whole homeless, terrible situation. My faith in God as well, it can still be rocky. I'll just finish up on this. I'll tell this one last really quick story. It's not like I moved into this apartment. It's stunning. It's amazing. I have security. I do have faith in God. But that can all happen. But I can still wake up in the morning and think, really though? Like, is that God, or is maybe it all just a big coincidence? I definitely still get these doubts, and I'm almost 4 years sober now. I'll be 4 years sober in June. Jack is doing great. Like, my life is from the girl drinking in the park, pretending to go to work, to having a permanent job, a permanent home. And yet I still doubt the existence of this power sometimes. I really do. But things still happen that I can't make sense of. I was at a wedding this weekend. It was like a 2-day wedding, and I'm not seeing anybody at the moment, and there was a guy there who happened to be sitting at my table, and we were chatting, and we seemed to be getting on really well, and I was like, oh my God, God is showing up for me here too, this is amazing. And then I messaged him, and he just never replied. We're now nearly on Wednesday, so I was like, oh, okay, well, that wasn't something then. And I immediately, when I don't get my way with something like that, start thinking, well, if God really loved me, that would have happened. And And then I start doubting the whole thing, you know. So one thing like that can happen and everything I've just told you goes into complete doubt for me. But then, you know, I rein myself back in, and I go back to my experience. You know, it doesn't matter what my thoughts on God are, or what my opinion on anything is. It's all down to experience. And my experience of step 3 has been when I surrendered, when I was convinced of those ABCs, and I genuinely said, okay, I'm going to hand things over to you. I'm going to turn to you with every decision. Every morning when I wake up, I'm going to ask you what you want me to do. I'm going to continually turn to you during the day, even if I'm angry at God, which I am sometimes. Like, what are you doing? But I'm still talking to him. I always have conscious contact. Everything's going to be okay. And I feel like no matter what's going on, there's a part of the big book, it says that he enables us to match calamity with serenity. So when things are going wrong, what we perceive to be wrong, we can have this sense of calmness and serenity, that we can kind of handle anything. And I do truly feel that way, no matter what's going down. Like the guy not replying to my texts, he's obviously not the guy for me. I do believe that, you know. I wish he was now, but you know, all is well and all will be well, provided that we do, as Jay told me, chop wood, carry water, carry the message, keep doing the next right thing. And remember, if you've taken step 3, remember that you've made that decision. Remind yourself every day. And if you haven't, my God, take it. Okay, I'm going to leave it there, Dave. I've talked enough. Thank you.